Okay, here we are. Tim, welcome.
What's up? Thanks for having me.
Good to have you on board. So, NBA talk. This is the Heatcheck Podcast with Carl and Tim, and we consider ourselves, what would you say, Tim, very amateur NBA analysts?
Amateur is still doing it credit because that insinuates in competitive. Competitive is something I'd say I'd have over my teams. I'm not sure if I'd apply it to my own analysis, but here we are.
That's because you're soft. Me, on the other hand, I will consider myself an amateur, probably moving more towards the pro. But we've got a lot to talk about today, Tim. A lot to talk about. You and I obviously have a deep history going back through the years into our high school years of basketball. Tim was our team statistician, so he would be on the sidelines writing down all of our stats.
Analog without the assistance of modern technology, which would be nice, obviously.
Yeah, and I mean, it did me wonders because it made me look hella good when we'd do the bus ride home and you would read out the stats.
I don't suppose you've got your stat line saved somewhere.
No. But that's look, we'll pull that out another time. Let's talk about probably the most disappointing team in the league this year. I'll let you do the honors and name them.
I mean, you got to be disappointed with the Clippers' championship aspirations.
I mean,
I know. Yeah, I mean, you go from 2 years removed from winning a championship and thinking you're competing to one to realistically for the second year kind of competing for a place in a play-in, which isn't a great feeling.
Let's hang on. You brought up something interesting. You said 2 years removed from your last championship. How much stock do you put into that championship?
As much as you would any other thing, because the thing ultimately is, so in terms of good teams they put away, Miami was a decent team. I'd say the Denver team that year in particular, and we'll come back to this with talk about Jokic later, but that Denver team in particular was very sharp, and I would say outside of that Lakers
didn't even
team,
play them in the finals though. You're cherry picking the harder team.
Okay, in 2018 the Cavs were not better than the Rockets, but the Rockets went in the finals. It's because the West was stacked. And that's been the history, and admittedly, maybe not so much this year, but that's been the history of the NBA in the 21st century.
So you consider that Laker championship in the bubble just the same as any other ring?
Just the same as any other.
Interesting. I don't put that much stock into it, if I'm being completely honest with you.
I'm terribly shocked that a Celtics fan doesn't put stock into a Lakers championship.
Well, I mean, look,
you can get into the particulars, but ultimately there weren't major injuries to most of the contending teams. And I mean, I will say the biggest narrative that year wasn't so much just us winning, but I think the disappointment of Milwaukee that year kind of not showing up the way they were expected to. Mm-hmm. And again, enjoying it now because I can. In hindsight, the Clippers just absolutely bottling it in their semifinal against the Nuggets. But to be fair, that even takes a bit of credit away from Denver because Denver were really good in that series, and I think it's proof of how good Nikola is. Like, there's just no doubt about it.
I mean, even Murray turned up.
Oh, 100%.
Murray turned up massively. And I'm not saying in your news feed and your Instagram didn't turn up that way. I mean, he turned up at the game, man. He turned up at the game and he balled out.
Let's stay away from what he's recording on socials. But
hey, let's go there, man. There, woo. Okay. So moving on from the bubble chip, which I give probably half a ring for. It's a pickup game. You played them. Jimmy Buckets in the finals.
You take away the number one seeded team's home advantage.
I'll give you absolutely no stock for that ring. It's half a ring, and that's why the Boston Celtics are still the team with the most wins in NBA history of all time.
Do you count the ones with 8 teams?
I do. If we want to have that argument, we can have it. Everyone always says, well, there was only 8 teams in the league. Yeah, but that talent dispersion matters.
Not so much.
It matters. If you were to take the NBA right now, all 30 teams, and you go and create a new 8-team league, all of those 8 teams are going to be absolutely stacked because you're going to take the best players from all of those teams. It's the same principle. 8 teams means less spots. You've got to be good to make them. So that actually works.
You've got 2 rings in an era where the ABA existed, though.
For us, thank you very much.
Doc was in the ABA. He wasn't in the NBA. So arguably the best player on the planet, along with Kareem, wasn't playing in the NBA. So you can't say that doesn't.
Hence. Well, that is debatable too. That is incredibly debatable. And I guess all I have to say to you, Tim, is you got half a ring for Let's look at LeBron's legacy here. He
What is
goes
this?
to the Lakers and he wins a bubble ring, and that's it.
So in the NBA record books, does it put an asterisk on the championship? It doesn't, right?
No, it doesn't. And this is where us as fans, we can debate it. But at the end of the day, yes, it's a win in your book. Just know that no one aside from Laker fans actually thinks it's worth anything. Anyway, moving on to the Lakers this season.
Yeah.
Talk me through, because I remember you, and I'm not going to do you dirty and pull up your screenshots, but you sent me some fairly convincing messages that your team was headed for the finals, and I think you even made a bold statement that the Lakers make the finals before Zion makes weight. Now, you weren't completely off with that, but they're lucky to make the play in it, or they're lucky to get past the play in, let alone the bloody finals.
We can go into the elements of why we stand where we do at the moment.
Let's do it. Why are the Lakers so bad at the moment?
I'm not going to portion blame in terms of how much of a percentage is what, because that's where you start getting into opinion rather than fact. But the facts are, the biggest headline, I think, for Lakers fans, and this is going to be disappointing for a lot of us, myself included, it isn't Westbrook. It's AD not being reliable. And that's not to say that's entirely his fault, but when you trade the farm for a guy and the expectations put on, not just by him, but by LeBron, who he obviously had a conversation with coming to LA about, that he was going to be the guy and it was going to be his team. He hasn't really, not necessarily entirely for his own fault, but he hasn't put the team on his back and he hasn't been able to perform, because part of being the face of a franchise is you have to carry the franchise. And if you're not there to do it, that's still completely on you. Like, guys will get labeled busts. Again, Greg Oden, for example, that don't show up. And that's not to say AD's Greg Oden, but my point is more, there's a lot of investment by the team into Anthony Davis. And, again, the ring goes a long way towards paying it back, but it's not to say he's entirely lived up to what was promised.
So you're putting most of that blame on AD?
No, not most of it. That's the first thing. I think that, in a way, should be the headline, because the next thing is something that was debated and people had opinions of, but it was kind of expected, is Russell Westbrook being a disappointment. When you're getting to the point where you will disrespect people on the court, but then you can't take disrespect, you talk about making effort, but then you don't make effort, and you're got the highest salary on the team, but you're not contributing, especially not to the level of that salary that you're being provided, that becomes a problem. When you say that you don't want to come off the bench, but you're not producing like you should be starting, that becomes a problem.
I mean, okay, so you're putting part of the blame on AD, part on Russ. There's a big name. There's a big name you haven't mentioned yet.
So ultimately, the thing is, and this is all, again, just people guessing from the outside, but the perception is that there was a move in place to the point where even Sacramento felt blindsided by what actually happened, where Buddy Hield was going to be a Laker. They'd be losing some of the players, but not the same that they lost in the Russell Westbrook trade. And between the front office, which is Jeannie Buss, Rob Pelinka, and the suspicion being LeBron and Anthony Davis, that they wanted Westbrook. So that's the move that was ultimately made. Now, if you're LeBron James and you're thinking about your legacy and you put your cards in on Russell Westbrook, you don't get to just absolve yourself of blame once things start going bad and blame it all on the front office and putting them on notice and putting stories out for your agency and the media to try throw the front office under the bus.
So you said just before that you didn't want to allocate percentages of blame, but let's do that, because I think ultimately, no matter which way you feel about it, X amount of blame does sit with someone and X amount does sit with someone else. How much of percentage of blame do you put on AD, Russ, and Bron?
Out of the total, or just between
let's just say out of
the total, that's probably too difficult. Out of the three of them,
who gets more of the blame?
Honestly, I would give, by proxy of the absence and the involvement and decision to bring Russ in, possibly AD, but AD and Bron would be close, because Bron, ultimately, it's his team as it stands. It's not AD's team. And he's been involved in that decision-making process. They've brought Russell in. He has to take a bit of blame for that because it's panned out so spectacularly badly. And then, again, AD for both being involved in that decision, but also just, again, not being able to produce on the court, which is admittedly because of injuries, but, in this day and age, injuries are part of the game. If you're not on the roster, you're not contributing.
So a majority of the blame, according to you, is LeBron and then AD, or AD then LeBron. And how much of that blame do you put on Russ and his performance?
I think it's hard because in hindsight, you should have seen it coming, considering what we've seen the last few years. But ultimately,
I don't know about that, man.
If you show up and you, like, again, his shooting numbers have been horrible. They've dropped off. His ability to get to the bucket and finish, it has dropped off more. I think his athleticism is declining, which people expected, and the joke was always, oh, well, what's he going to do once his athleticism declines? But ultimately, it doesn't seem like there's been a whole lot of adjustment. He talks about putting in effort, making changes, but you don't see visible change out on the floor.
I'm gonna interject there. So a narrative that I've been seeing a lot of, and you've touched on it briefly, is Russ and his decline in play. But actually, Russ is coming off, when he was in Washington, he was coming off a career high in assists. He was still putting up 20, 22 buckets a game. So he was a 20 and 11 player, I think he was average assists in Washington. So he's a 20 and 11 player. That's not a decline for by any means. Remember, he was just, a season before that was averaging triple-double?
To your point.
So let me finish. So Russell Westbrook, and this might surprise you, it might not, it's not his worst season in shooting. It's not his worst season in turnovers. And it's his, three-pointers, I think it's one of his worst three-pointing shooters, but he's not a three-point shooter. But it's not his worst turnover year, and it's not his worst shooting year. LeBron, actually, interestingly enough, has almost the same amount of turnovers per game as Russ. He might even have more. No. Russ just has a little bit more. But Russ is getting slandered for turning the ball over, shooting terribly, and not being, I guess, a true point guard. Which, playing with LeBron, you're going to have to give that up. You get that. But this isn't Russ's worst year by any means. So when I see all these people saying Russ is the problem, I don't know if I agree entirely with that. I actually think Russ should get a tiny bit of the blame, being a superstar, sure. But I just think it's a combination of LeBron playing GM and having so much power. And this is the other side of the coin of players have no power, right? And people getting mad when players leave franchises and demand trades and stuff. It's like, I get the narrative that a player should, at some extent, should have some control over his destiny. But when you get to LeBron's status, it's almost breaks the rules in a sense, because LeBron can demand any player he wants. LeBron can request whatever trade he wants, and most of the times he's going to get it to keep the teams happy. And this is a situation, and to be honest, and you know, right from the start, I've always had the argument that LeBron and AD will never work. And I had that thought because LeBron gave up the house to get him. And it's like buying a car you know is prone to break down, but expecting to still win the race, you know? It's like, yeah, you might get lucky, and you did with the bubble, but a team that had so much assets given away for what? Russell Westbrook and an injured-prone AD. I just think you made your bed, son, you lie in it. And that's what's happening here, and it's finally catching up with them. So
I think asset management, to your point, asset management has been something that has not been reflected well by the front office since they've taken over. Originally, Magic Johnson with Rob Pelinka basically working as understudy. Now Rob more or less running the show under Jeannie Buss's watch. But if you look at a lot of, I'll say this with regard to asset management, a lot of times when players are on the Lakers, Kuzma, KCP,
Caruso,
Brandon Ingram, like guys will be underrated and, oh, he's not that good, he just gets attention because he's a Laker. They go elsewhere and produce, and it's like, oh, the Lakers got rid of them, they're stupid. It's like, well, you can't have it both ways. Now, ultimately, I think, especially with the more recent moves in this offseason, it does lean that way, because you get rid of guys like KCP and Kuzma, who, yes, probably you could argue Russ has more value than them, but not on this team, and perhaps not the right fit for what we need, considering who's sitting at the top of the food chain. And then when what's unforgivable, and I didn't get to this part of the blame, but I will now, for front office or ownership to decide we're not going to be a luxury tax-paying team as much as we can, we're going to cheap out on a $7 to $10 million a year contract guy who's a really important part of our team because of the luxury tax implications, and let him walk for free is not Laker basketball, and it never has been. That's not a move Jerry Buss would have made. That's not a move Jerry West would have made. That's not even a move Phil Jackson would have made. So between them, ultimately who that say comes down to is probably Jeannie Buss, but them letting a guy like Caruso walk, it's not that, Caruso's the difference between them being where they are in a championship, but it's endemic of a bigger problem of if you're more worried about that than you are about winning, then...
But at what point, and this is what frustrates me about LeBron, right? He's GM when he wants to be, but he's hands off, I'm only a player when he wants to be. And if he can get Russell Westbrook and AD to LA, how can't he keep Caruso? And sure, he can go in and bat for Caruso and whatever, but, it's almost like he picks his battles and he constructs his team, and hey, when it doesn't work, LeBron needs to stand up and go, hey, this is on me. I got all these people in. I sold away out all of our assets for it. Yes, LeBron is putting up career numbers. He hasn't played this good since Cleveland in terms of points, in terms of efficiency. The dude is playing outstanding, but I wonder if there's something in that. Is LeBron having a career year at the expense of somebody else?
Well, this is going to go back to a point I wanted to talk about with Russ before. So you talk about Russ's numbers last year, but ultimately you have to look at the fact that, let's be honest, the Wizards weren't a good team, and counting numbers don't always indicate a pattern. If you look at D'Angelo Russell's impact on the Nets versus what he's done in Golden State and now with Minnesota, you can't always say that just because a guy puts up numbers somewhere that he's going to be an important player for your team.
No, of course.
So I think with LeBron, now the interesting thing about that is on arguably worse spacing, or not arguably worse spacing, horribly worse spacing than guys like Giannis or Jokic or Embiid, LeBron is putting up really decent efficiency numbers and scoring. He's still in there to win the scoring title, which isn't the most important thing, but it puts in perspective how well he's playing despite how horrible, arguably, the roster construction, it's not going well for the Lakers.
That's my question to you, is he playing well for the success of the team, or is he just chasing Kareem? Because it almost feels, they've blown out a lead, or they're getting blown out, or they're blowing out a team, and he's still in the game in the fourth quarter. Why?
I think if you watch, and again, I imagine you don't watch a lot of Lakers games, which is...
I watch some Lakers games. I
games.
like to see them suffer, so I watch a lot.
A big trend in Lakers games this year is getting down in the second or third quarter, kind of fighting back to almost catching up to lead, or sometimes even catching the lead, and then dropping it late in the game. So it's almost not exactly but people bring up the 81-point game from Kobe, for example, and say, he was just putting shots up. But if you watch that game, he kind of had to do that for them to win. So LeBron's putting up a lot of these numbers, chasing wins when he really shouldn't be, because the idea is he wanted to bring Russ in to take the pressure off himself.
Exactly.
It's not exactly playing out that way, so he's having to exert himself a lot more than he did in recent seasons.
And are the Lakers treating Russ as a true point guard? They exactly. And there's another point, the whole, and this was what, was floated was Russ is the perfect person to come and get us points, get us assists, so LeBron can rest. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing LeBron still dominating. We're seeing Russ pushed out to a 2 spot, and it's and what's happening. And I don't know how much of that is due to LeBron chasing Kareem. I don't know how much of that is, LeBron trying to put the team on his back. But one thing we do know is the Lakers are absolute garbages. Yeah. So and I feel for you, my friend.
No. I know that's not true, but thank you. I feel like if you watch them play, Westbrook, as it has been the case in the past, is absolutely an issue off the ball. And you could put that down to terrible, again,
but that's been his whole career, right?
Yeah, but you could put that down to terrible roster construction. But ultimately, let's simplify it down to this. You'd rather have the ball in LeBron's hand making decisions than Russ. There's no two ways about it. He's amongst the greatest players ever in terms of decision-making, both in terms of getting a bucket or getting the ball to the right person.
Agree, but LeBron's, bar early Cleveland days, he's always had a solid option. He's always had either a shooter with him, or he's always had someone who could score. He's got Russ, he's got broken AD, and who else? Who's he got with him? So I can see why he's trying to take that load, but it's just... This Laker team just wasn't put together smartly, in my opinion.
So they've kind of dimed out on guys like Caruso, and it's not to say that's exactly the answer, but you see like a positive move, for example, I'd say is getting Malik Monk for the deal they got him for. Like his production hasn't necessarily been completely consistent, but he's helped out.
It's been horrible. 1-8, 8-22. Like just it's been horrible.
No, but again, that's like for what you're paying him and what you're asking him to do, he's overachieving in his role. The problem is the guys who are supposed to be in the second, third, and fourth spots on the roster, like. Again, AD, Westbrook, and like even the guys below that, like and again, Frank Vogel is entirely to blame, but the reliance on guys like Ariza, like Ariza's going to make the difference when he comes back, or playing Melo extended minutes at center, and guys just absolutely abusing him on defense, like that is as big an issue rather than
but
the production of guys like
you
Monk.
could have asked any casual fan that at the start of the season, and most people would have said, Melo's old. Can't play D. Ariza's old. Maybe can shoot some threes. You know, Russ, him and LeBron are ball hogs. This was common knowledge around the world as soon as this trade was announced. So it's almost not. I'm not surprised whatsoever that the Lakers are so bad. I just love watching Laker fan apologists just try and dig their way out and justify it.
No, in hindsight, I think LeBron who had perhaps too much confidence in himself because he's built a recipe of if we just get the talented, we can eventually.
For his team, man, because he's putting up numbers. I don't like the guy, but he's putting up numbers.
No. But what I mean is his ability to GM, because again in Miami, when Wade was still trying to be the guy, it didn't really work for them, and that's partly on LeBron for not just taking assertive ownership of that. 2012 onwards was an issue. He made sure that everyone had their respective roles. And so fitting guys into where it's not just about the total sum of the parts, but even then you can kind of make them fit. And they just haven't been able to do that with Russ. And like that's partly on LeBron for having all the past evidence and deciding not to do so. But that's also on Russ. He's now got the opportunity. He's playing at home in LA. He's got a chance for a team that, like, based on the three best players being healthy, would be able to make a deep playoff run. But he's not fitting in. He's not producing. Like, he's producing, he can talk about his counting stats, but ultimately he's not doing what the team needs him to do. And the best example of that, if you watch his defense where he double teams out of sequence, he doesn't follow defensive rotations, he'll kind of sit in no man's land and let people get open. And it's not always his guy that's getting open, but he's covering for a guy half-assedly, letting the second guy get it, and then that guy gets open. And so he's people are patching up for his mistakes a lot, and it's not all on Russ because, honestly, compared to the last 2 years, this team is terrible defensively. Which, considering it's a Frank Vogel coach team,
this team's horrible defensively, and when you watch a game, it's you can almost see it as clear as black and white. You know, it's almost like the veterans on the floor have this attitude that, hey, youngin, defense, go play it. You know, that's almost like the veterans expect the youngins to do all the D, but they want the ball on offense all the time. It's very interesting, and it's actually something that you see a lot in pickup games, and it's actually something you see a lot in school games. Is it's almost this area of unchecked egos. You know, the best guy on the floor almost thinks, I don't have to play defense because I'm our scorer, and the young guy on the team earning his spot, he's going to work really hard, so we'll throw him on defense. And I've seen so many positions of Laker games where Russ is just standing and he's watching, and he's standing and he's watching, and LeBron's doing the same. And it's not usually on the first play. It's usually when there's been a breakdown of play, or it's if there's been a defensive rebound or an offensive rebound grabbed, and then they have to try and make something out of nothing. That's when I see a lot of the Lakers standing around and the young guns really gunning for their spot. My question now is, how do you fix it, man? I mean, we know they're not making the finals this year. I'm going to put my hand on my heart and say Lakers aren't in the finals this year. But how do they fix it from now to the end of the season so that they can secure a playoff spot or at least win a play-in spot? What do you think they need to do?
I mean, it's tough because really they have to just, as much as they can, and stats will kill you. The Lakers haven't won consecutive games since the start of the year, basically.
That's rough.
Which is rough.
That is rough.
Because if you're already kind of on the bubble, no pun intended, and you're trying to fight your way into even keeping the 9 spot or even getting to like the 8 spot maybe, which again now isn't going to happen, but for a while it was a chance. I mean, they lost one relatively close game against Clippers following another relatively close game, and then another game they just get blown out basically.
Is that the game versus Portland?
No, I'm referring specifically to the Clippers ones because the Clippers are in that spot, right?
Yeah, when they lost the Clippers,
when you lose 3 straight games against them and you're losing ground to them, they're now 7 games back with 15 games ish to go.
Yeah,
by the time
and they've got I think they've got a really hard.
We've got
really hard timetable.
It's
left.
technically getting slightly easier, but for a long time we've had the toughest schedule left in the NBA.
Yeah, but you did start with the easiest. Or one of the easiest.
Yeah, but it's not like we built a massive win streak off of that. So early, it wasn't too bad. But yeah, absolutely, 100% not capitalizing. That has been a Laker issue going back long before LeBron, though. Of like sometimes them turning off the switch. That goes back to the Kobe, Gasol, Odom teams of turning off the switch against teams that they probably should be taking care of.
Yes.
But I think the biggest issue with these guys is so ultimately in terms of the rest of the season, it's. I think the biggest impasse is I think Vogel wants to bench Westbrook, and there's a ton of articles coming out about the back and forth between them and Russ saying he's not going to accept it. It's been something they've discussed. It's been something they haven't discussed.
What's your thoughts on that? Benching Russ.
It's not.
He's a first round Hall of Famer.
When you frame it as benching it, obviously it's not going to go down well for a guy who, and we saw this with Melo over the last few years. Like it took him a long time to accept that he wasn't that guy anymore.
But Melo was having a steady decline over the years. Russ, I don't know if I've seen that. Like I said, 22 and 11 last year. The year before it was similar numbers. Like he's not exactly
he doesn't get to the bucket
player.
The same way, and he doesn't shoot anything worth like. Teams are happy for him to have the ball. Of course. Because it's a bad shot, it's a turnover the majority of the time, and that's not what you want from your primary ball handler.
Russ is a volume scorer, though. I think this year is the year that he's taken the least amount of field goal attempts since his sophomore year. So he's taken the least amount of field goal attempts this year than any other year. And there's, I think, maybe some, hey,
the ball's been taken out of his hand.
There's an answer there. Russ hasn't always been super efficient, but he could put up some numbers if you let him shoot enough.
So the idea of putting him in the bench isn't so much as demotion, but the idea is to best utilize him. You don't want him on the floor with LeBron. If he's in the second unit,
agree,
you're putting him against less talented teams, like against less talented units.
In theory, yes.
So that means, again, that's more his comfort zone, like no offense intended to him, but he will do better against an average defense rather than the better, the starters.
So why is he your highest paid guy on your team?
Because the team felt like they needed to make a trade and his salary was already locked in. So he'd already received his Supermax.
But the point is they should have known this. They should have known this going in. And so fixing it, I don't know. I mean, in my opinion, they missed the trade deadline. There's one option. It's either Russ comes off the bench and plays that second unit, but you don't have him late game, which is it's hard because
it's a hard sell because
it's a terrible use of your assets as well. Russell Westbrook isn't a scrub,
but
he's not a scrub. He has every right. I agree with Russ in some ways that he has every right to be on the closing lineup. He's that good a player. Is he? So, but my question is, how about Bron? He's the person that can play 5 positions. Why isn't he sacrificing?
Because ultimately, when it comes down to it, it's better to have the ball in his hand than Russ's. And that's the problem. It goes back to the same thing. There's only one basketball, and LeBron can play off ball. You've seen him taking, over last year, for example, more off the ball work and kind of trying to get out of it, which has been his whole idea. He wants to have spurts of not doing that. But when the guy you're giving it to isn't getting the job done, and not just that, but the component parts around you aren't designed to give you success. So something I want to go back, you kind of touched on briefly, is early Cleveland, there weren't a lot of scoring options outside of himself, but they were a well-drilled defensive team. And so the fact that you can't rely on a lot of the team for defense, like even a guy who gives hustle like, say, Austin Reeves, because he's a smaller defender, even though he's not too bad as a one-on-one ball defender, because he's a lot smaller, he'll get pushed around a lot, he'll get beat in rotations and things like that. So you get guys targeting him in switches because they want to get the guys like Reggie Jackson onto him. Because they feel like they can take advantage of the fact he's makes good defensive judgments and he does good rotations, but he just doesn't necessarily have the physicality, and so they'll know that and they can take advantage of that. So when you're having to make all these sacrifices, and then one of your star players is having to make a sacrifice, you don't have enough of the right stuff. You can make small sacrifices here and there. You can't be everyone but Bron, basically having to make adjustments.
Where do you think Lakers end up? Just get your last thoughts on this before we move on. Where do you think Lakers end up this year in the playoffs?
Best case scenario, I think they get into the play-in they go into the first round, because of where they're positioned now, that guarantees it's pretty much against the Suns. AD could potentially be back by the end of the season.
I don't want your potentials. Where do they end up? What? Tell me.
No,
what do they do?
What
do they do?
It's hard to read. So, best case scenario, a competitive 6-game series against Phoenix, fully healthy.
With the Suns winning, right?
I'd still expect the Suns to win just because the roster construction I don't think fits.
Okay, so you're expecting a first round exit this year?
Potentially. The worst case scenario is just either they slip out of the play-in, which is still on the cards, or they make the play-in and lose. Yeah, which is still on the cards as well. Because the play-in, where they'll be positioned, they'll have to beat a team like Portland or Minnesota and then beat the Clippers as well.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think Lakers, in the next few weeks, we're going to see them just completely give up. And I actually think they don't make the play-in this year.
We've talked about it, and even Melo's kind of addressed it. Like, I don't disagree with his comments that basically they look like they've given up, which isn't great when you got a veteran player basically saying, we might have given up.
One of the greatest players of all time. Anyway, moving on. Ja Morant, one of probably the most exciting players to watch that I've seen in a long time, actually. I love watching KD, but you can't, when you get numb to something, you see it so many times. I love watching KD play. I love watching Bron play. But you see a guy like Ja come along and you're like, holy moly, this is why, this is the kind of player that comes along and inspires young people to start playing basketball. The comparisons to Allen Iverson are incredible, and I can see that. AI, not only culturally, but also on the ball, was just an absolute beast. So, Ja for me, I got to watch all his games. He's an amazing player to watch. I love watching the dude. He can put up buckets. I'm a bit worried about his size, if I'm being honest with you. He's not the biggest dude, but man, does he make up for it. He almost reminds me of Lionheart. He's amazing. So he's Rookie of the Year. If I cast your brain back a bit, if Zion doesn't get injured, what do you reckon happens that year? You reckon Zion takes a Rookie of the Year?
It's hard to say because, again, so much of his play wasn't there because of what happened. But I would say there was a large media narrative around the hype around Zion. So maybe that he doesn't, it sounds like a backhanded compliment, but he had so much hype and was expected to be so good.
And he was.
Even if he lived up to a part of that, they'd be like, oh, yeah, no, this is Zion. He's this and this and this. Even if Ja, despite not having that hype, obviously massively exceeded expectations.
Yeah, I think if Zion doesn't get injured, I definitely think he wins Rookie of the Year that year. He was putting up, I think, 20 and 7 maybe, or 20 and 6. I think Ja was 17, 6 and 6 maybe. It would have been close, but I think Zion, with his narrative of the media hype coming in, I think Zion would have won it. But this has to be one of the most lopsided draft classes so far. You got those two, and then you got a few others in that draft class, but a lot of trash as well. But it's one of the most lopsided, and I just really, really, really hope Zion can come back healthy. He is showing signs of Greg Oden curse and his foot healing, but also how much of that is due to the fact he just doesn't want to play in Pelicans, play with the Pels. So,
again, I'm all for player empowerment because we've seen the type of restrictions and type of attitude, if anyone out there's seen winning time, how the attitude the owners in the NBA used to have towards rookies.
I imagine it's the same, man.
And so, that's why if a player wants to take control of their destiny, that's fine. But equally at the same time, when you've had kind of a city, a community, a team or whatever invest into a guy so much, and he's basically, and this isn't to say this is his attitude, but the suspicion is that he's a little bit like peace out. Then you can obviously understand there's a bit of him not matching the contribution that he's been given by that community, I guess. But the thing with Zion is it's hard because it's shades of Embiid, because Embiid had obviously a checkered history
very true.
With injuries early, and we can see what he's producing now, and he's arguably one of the best players in the world, if not the best.
Yep, he's definitely MVP candidate.
But yeah, it's hard to tell Zion because, again, you still got to see how that's going to round out. It could end up like a guy like Ingram, his teammate, who a lot of people were back and forth on. He kind of did well when he was on his own with the Lakers. It was him and Lonzo didn't fit as much once LeBron came into the team. So obviously trades happen. Takes a while to get acclimated in New Orleans, but you can see the quality of player he is. And I think he's the kind of guy, I mean, I'll argue him over Jaylen Brown. That can be another discussion, but like you can see how Ingram's produced. So sometimes my point with Ingram is more guys take a bit of time to mature sometimes. So some guys will be like Luka, off to the ground running, like Ja, they'll get it straight away. Some guys will take even 5 or 6 years in, and then you'll start seeing a quality player. So I think sometimes because we live in a more accelerated age where the pressure and the ticker is going a lot more, that guys get expected to develop like that.
Well, and that's just the number one draft pick curse, isn't it? If you're number one, you are expected to be a fully grown man when you hit that league.
100%.
So anyway, back to Ja. The reason I wanted to bring up Ja is just because I want to bring up a discussion around what are your thoughts on his claim for MVP and most improved player of the year? Because you could argue that he has a shot at both.
I mean, he's I put him in a solidly also considered. So like he's putting up enough to where it's like you kind of the same way guys would kind of casually mention Julius Randle as an outside MVP candidate a couple of years ago. I don't think that was ever really a thing, but like more just a recognition that this guy's performing really well in an environment where you're not necessarily expected to. So I think how well Memphis is doing, obviously he gets the majority of the credit for that. Just going back to the analysis, I think I see more young Derrick Rose in him, but
you see more Derrick Rose and Ja than AI.
Than AI, yeah.
Wow, okay.
But I mean, ultimately the thing is for them, it's just consistency because this has become a trend, like with Trey and like with Luka, where you can see guys have coming out parties in the season, but ultimately, like this is the NBA, they're going to be judged on the playoffs. So especially with Memphis being positioned where they are, if they're not successful in the playoffs, then scrutiny will undoubtedly start coming into that as well, which is the problem with the rise. Like everyone loves seeing a narrative where a young player coming in doing well, but it's early. Like he doesn't have as many reps in the playoffs. And
no, I think he had that one. They went to playoffs last year. Had that one series. From memory, though, he did ball out. He put up 30 points from memory.
But so this is again
on average.
It might be crossing over to something I'm talking about later, but like a lot of early Luka performances where it's like there's a difference I see in him this year where even like Trae Young, for example, has better efficiency in terms of his play efficiency rating and his win shares than Luka does. But no one would pick Trae over Luka. Like you just wouldn't. I think Luka's doing a better job of ingratiating himself in terms of him being successful, but also his teammates. And so it's at a point where it's not to say Ja doesn't make his teammates successful, but you can't make other players play exactly like you do. So there'll be a bit of that, like him finding out how to make his team better.
You take Ja Moran off this team, and this team are nowhere near the playoffs.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
I have no disagreement with that. But
so if we look at that strictly from an MVP argument, I think Ja's probably outside. I think he's definitely the smallest guy in contention for MVP. If you look at who the MVP candidates are, and we'll touch on it later, Joker, Giannis, Embiid, and I think Ja's right there. So I think Ja is definitely probably in the top 5 for MVP. Where do you put him for most improved player? Because I mean, just to rattle off his preseason, his last season numbers. He currently sits at 27, 6, and 7. And the year before, sorry, I've just lost it here. And then the year before it was 19, 7, and 4. So he's almost 2 more rebounds a game, same amount of assists, but he's putting up 8 more points a game. So I think most improved player candidate is, I think he's definitely up there
in the lead. Yeah.
In the lead. Who else would you put in that category? I mean, Desmond Baines, his teammate, is absolutely killer.
The thing that's always difficult with things like that, and this goes back to, again, kind of foreshadowing Embiid, like when you have 2 really good players on the same team for any award, they tend to take votes away from one another.
Yep.
So I think in that case, as good as Desmond's been, he's not going to get the same respect he would as if he was doing the same thing on a different team, because
Of course, because Jar's going to get most of the credit for that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So it'll be like he's improved, he's doing really well, but on the same time, the leadership he's getting, in essence.
Touching on that MVP, my 5 in order, number 1 is Joker. His numbers are absolutely crazy. It's like high 20s, nearly a triple-double, I think, 15 and something or 14 and something.
Absolutely insane.
Joker is crazy. He's just 7-foot Luka pretty much. Giannis, Embiid. I think those are your real 3 for a shot at MVP. What I think is going to happen this year is I actually think this is going to be Embiid's first year for MVP, and the reason I think that is because of voter fatigue. We know it's real. We know it happens. Joker just, no matter how, you have players that come in the league who are just so insane and so good, but they just don't have that X factor, They just don't have that, call it marketability, call it personality, call it whatever. But Joker is like a bowl of vanilla ice cream in a shop of all these flavors, So yeah, he tastes good, but people want the exciting stuff. And we haven't really, I'm just thinking of who has our face of the NBA MVPs been. You could argue Giannis, but outside of that, out of Joker and Giannis, they still are missing a little bit of something. So I think they're missing that X factor, personality, whatever, marketability, even though Giannis does have a bit of that.
A ton of that.
And then voter fatigue. So he's got that going against him as well. So I think this is the year that Embiid actually gets over that hump, especially now pairing with Philly, with James Harden. You got all of the strip club lovers in Philly going, woo! So I think I'm putting my money on Embiid this year. How about you?
If I had to be a betting man, I'll say Embiid. I'm going to segue a bit from that. So I think based on attitude come out with team success and just downright consistency, you've mentioned him, but I feel like as much as anyone, Giannis deserves it this year because he's just been such a rock and just what he does defensively. But the thing that's biggest to me...
Sorry, more than Jokic?
I would say so. But the thing that's difficult is with Nikola, you can argue about like what he's been missing in terms of the squad, which is a bigger factor than it is with Milwaukee. So like obviously they're in the 6th spot. They would be projected as a fully healthy team to be a lot better than that. They'd be, again, my opinion, usually one of the best teams in the West over the last 3 years. But it just hasn't panned out with them in terms of injuries, especially with Jamal. So,
What do you think? What do you think in terms of the MVP? Like, obviously, there's media vote, there's player, all that crap. What are your thoughts on how the MVP is actually judged, and how do you think it should be judged? Do you think they're doing a good job?
Well, I think no matter what, it's going to be difficult because the knock early on was originally it was a players' vote, and so there was a lot of times where, don't get me wrong, Bill Russell stands as arguably the greatest icon of success in the NBA, but there was more than one player who's come forward and said they voted for Russell because they didn't like Wilt.
Yep.
And so having an award where it's based almost just on popularity rather than just success isn't ideal.
Yep.
So I think having the feedback of players is important. I think having the feedback of coaches is important. I do think you want to... Well, because...
I mean...
Okay, ultimately, so would you trust the mind of, say, a guy like Jerry West or Pat Riley or Eric Spoelstra?
It depends, because we're going to bring this up in a minute when we talk about
like someone like, say, Jackie McMullen or Stephen A. Smith or like that's unfair to Jackie, to be fair. To put Stephen A. is a really good reporter.
The thing is, everyone comes at this with a level of bias, right? If LeBron cooked my team in the finals last year, I'm not going to vote that guy to be the MVP. There's just no way, because it's bad blood there. It's competitive. So it's like how much of that goes on and how much of, players for the most part, they're not allowed to come out and say it. But, you catching out, they're not a fan of the media being in the locker room. They're not a fan of having to talk to the media after every game after a bad loss. So you can get rubbed you can rub a reporter the wrong way. You can rub a room of reporters the wrong way if you turn up after a bad loss and just...
Are we talking about Kareem?
Oh, we are talking about Kareem. So it's really... I think it's too fragile a system at the moment. I think it's based on too much of how I feel as opposed to what the facts are. I think the MVP should be based on a number of factors. One... How much do you contribute to your team's daily success. Not so much how high your team's ranked in the league. I don't think that should have an effect, because you can definitely be an MVP on a bad team. That doesn't mean that you're a bad player. It just means that
it's almost the exception that proves the rule, though, because you look at a guy like when Russ won his MVP.
Yes.
That's the exception that proves the rule.
But let's talk about what MVP is. It's the most valuable player. It's not the league's best player. It's the most valuable player. If you are more valuable to your team and your franchise than the next guy, that's what it should be voted on, not my team's doing well because we've got a team of great players. There's a team that doesn't. It's the most valuable player, not the best player. And I think that's where a lot of people go. That's where a lot of people get, I think, where they just overlook the fact. Like, if you're on a bad team and you're putting up 50, 20 and whatever, you're the most valuable player to that team. That team would be worse without you.
So are we going to get into going back, just to clarify this, because if we're trying to constructive how you build an MVP narrative, are we going to go back to 05, 06 and talk about a guy who's on a 7th seed team but's putting up numbers just blowing everyone away, and you can clearly see if you put that guy on even an average team, they become a title contender.
That's how I look at it, because right now it's too narrative driven, man. It's way too narrative driven.
If that's the case, if we were, because this is my problem with MVP, it is a narrative, and there is a history of people saying, there's certain criteria, like you have to be a 2 or 3 seed, you have to have X amount of wins,
why,
things like that. So if you're going on, you don't want it to swing too much the other way, because you don't want it to be and I love Jerry West, but you don't want it to be he played really well in the losing team, like he was so much better, or LeBron in 2015. You don't want it to be like that, where you reward players who are on bad teams for being good, rather than take credit away from guys who might be on a good team. But if that's the criteria, then there's not really much debate. It'd kind of have to be Jokic, maybe followed by MB.
Yeah, and that's all I'm saying. I'm just saying that MVP at the moment just seems to be a whole lot of who can kiss butt the most, who can get along with the most people, who can put up because it's just, and a lot of time, how much of that comes down to straight luck? Who gets drafted to a middle of the road team or an upper end team? They have a breakout year, and now in 2 years' time they're the league MVP because they just happened to, that, and that's another narrative situation. So, in my opinion, that should change a bit, but we're both agreeing that's probably Embiid. Just moving on into changing of rules and stuff. Obviously, the All-Star Weekend is something, in my opinion, that I actually have never been super excited to watch. When I first got into basketball way back in high school, the idea of, holy crap, all of the best players in the league are going to play this game. Oh my God, the dunk contest. Oh my God, the 3-point shot, the skills challenge. I remember first hearing about the skills challenge and thinking, man, they're going to do some crazy stuff, like Harlem Globetrotter type stuff, because this is the NBA. And then I watched my very first All-Star Weekend, and I remember thinking, this is kind of lame. There's no defense played. The guys are just letting them dunk and whatever. And I remember walking away from that very first All-Star game thinking, oh, okay, that's okay. And then I think I remember watching the first dunk comp that I've ever seen and feeling...
What year? Come on, you have to say what year.
It was the year where Jay Rich was playing. Jay Rich. It might have been 07.
I feel like he won a couple in a row, or maybe 3.
Maybe 07. I remember Jay Rich was competing. I don't remember the exact year, but I remember Jay Rich was in it. And I remember just thinking, okay, all right. And then the 3-point shootout, I actually remember being really surprised at how many they missed, because I just assumed as a young me they're going to hit every shot. But anyway, I say all that to say this. I just watched the All-Star Weekend a few weeks ago, and I had that same feeling almost, 10 years later, thinking, what is going on here? And I love what they've done with the new format for the ASG. I think it's better. Don't get me wrong. They do end up playing towards the end of the quarter, so that's better. But boy, that dunk comp sucked. And we brought up a point earlier when you said, would you respect the opinion of players or the media? What the hell is Isaiah Thomas judging the dunk comp? That guy's lucky if he's ever hit the rim with his hand in his life.
I do think there's a factor in selecting the judges you can see of popularity. So, they'll go for someone.
He ain't popular. Man.
Maybe not with the players, but, you can't deny his status as an all-time great. So, I think that's more the factor.
He shouldn't be judged.
So, Like, just to throw the idea out there, because it seems to be the case where, not to say they're not capable of doing so, but you see a lot of Doc, you see a lot
exactly.
You see a lot of
Neek, Doc, Shaq, Kenny. And it's like, what are these guys doing judging the dunk comp?
The alternate being, if they're going to get players involved, and I do think they still should have most of the players, because ultimately it's them that can tell that skill gap, then maybe they need to be less worried about the profile of the guys.
It needs to be Blake Griffin, Zach LaVine, last year's winner. It's got to be guys who can dunk and know how hard it is.
No, that's what I was going to... So what I was getting to is having guys like Jay Rich or having guys like Vince, like, just skew it down a few generations, which isn't to say it's just about getting younger, but it's more guys who have been in it more recently.
Yeah.
And so guys who have that perspective.
I agree. So I went on a bit of a tangent there around the media, but what I was getting to was the All-Star Weekend is just straight boring to watch now. I don't get excited to watch it. I do like how they have mixed it up a little bit in the format of the skills challenge, but essentially they're doing training drills. That's not skills. Like we want to see NBA level skills. We want to see them do things that the average Joe couldn't do. I saw the skills challenge. I thought, damn, I could do that when I was 12. So my question to you is, what's your thoughts on the All-Star Weekend as it currently exists, and do you think there's any need to change it?
All right, so I'm going to steal a bit of your thunder. Like, this is an idea you've talked to me about off camera, but one thing mentioned is obviously main eventing the 3-point contest rather than dunk contest for one.
Yes.
Because that seems to be by far the most interesting part of All-Star Saturday night.
Do you think the 3-point contest needs any changes? I like how they added in the 3-ball with the Mountain Dew. That was cool.
I'm not entirely for it, but I'm not entirely against it. I think the main thing is about the drama of the contest, and or not only that, but having those coming out parties where you get the guys who just absolutely go off. I think that's become more interesting than the dunk contest has. I feel like it'd be better to have people. This goes back to a little bit of sports, but a little bit of pro wrestling as well. You want to start the show with something high energy and interesting. Put the dunk contest first, because then that way, if it's a disappointment, that's not the thing people are going to remember.
Right. That's right.
When you put it on last and it's a disappointment. This is me crossing over a bit into pro wrestling, but a famous example, they had Rock and Hulk Hogan, two of the biggest guys ever, go at it. They didn't put them in the main event. The guys who went on after them were Triple H and Chris Jericho. How are you going to expect a crowd to get behind a match when you've just had two of the greatest ever go at it? Like, imagine if you saw like a one-on-one game between LeBron and KD, like they're both healthy. That'd be insane.
You've just said, in my opinion, what would change All-Star Weekend. King of the Court, baby, first of 21. But that right there would get me up in the morning to see who the best one-on-one player was. That, you've just said it.
But that idea's come back to the other thing I want to mention with regard to the All-Star Weekend. You have to remember, players now, even compared to the 90s, like they're playing dramatically less minutes, dramatically less games, because you're worried about your long-term health, right? Yes. The first giveaway of the All-Star Weekend, guys don't want to get hurt. Because you have seen it happen. Like, again, go back a few years, Wade breaking Kobe's nose in the 2012 All-Star game. It puts him out. And again, it's Kobe keeps playing through it, but it's just little things like that. Guys don't want to go in and get hurt. So
but it's like this cycle, right? It's like a cycle of disappointment. It's guys don't want to get hurt, so they don't play hard in the All-Star game. The All-Star game, inadvertently, is crap. People don't put stock into being selected as an All-Star. It doesn't matter on your resume, so then it goes in the circle. Maybe
and it devalues it.
Maybe you start valuing the All-Star game more. People are going to want to start playing. Injury is always going to be there, right? I can get injured walking down the stairs tomorrow. So could Kobe. Kobe can't, but so could LeBron. So could other people. You could hurt yourself doing damn near anything. So I think once you put stock back into what the All-Star game means and being selected as an All-Star means, brings me to another point: get rid of the bloody public vote. I get public vote. I get it. You want to make money off them texting in and all that. I get it. But we can't have another Wiggins in the All-Star game. Or just give it a percentage. Yeah, give it a percentage. But you can't have Wiggins in an All-Star game when you've got people that deserve it being there. And then the other thing, when they are there, what are they doing? They're mucking around. They're shooting from half court. They're letting Jar do bloody windmill dunks on you. It's just not fun to watch. So here's what I propose they should do. And if you're listening, Adam Silver, you can have these ideas for free. Number one, King of the Court. I think you introduce one-on-one, and I think this is how you do it. And I think this is how you do exactly the same thing for the 3-point contest as well. Every single team submits one player, their best player, or someone in their top 3. They then enter like a mini playoff round each until you get to a one-on-one. So it's not just who the players vote in or who the media votes in. every single team has a shot at sending one of their best players to win King of the Court 1-on-1 for the All-Star Weekend. You then do the same thing for the 3-point contest. All right? You just nominate a player from a team. That way each team's represented, and it becomes a bit more... Because one thing about the NBA, right, when you have a 7-game series, generally the best team wins. It's hard for an underdog or a team to get lucky 4 times. That in the NFL, though, you know, it's a single elimination. You have a good game, you show up, your good team has a bad game, boom, you're out. I think that is what they should bring to the King of the Court and the 3-point contest. They should just, whoever turns up on because we know Steph Curry's the greatest shooter of all time, without a doubt. But he's not going to. But he's going to show up on the day. But he's not going to win every single 3-point contest.
And is it for charity for kids?
Exactly. He's not. Exactly my point. So it brings a little bit of that anyone could win it kind of vibe. So King of the Court, and then the dunk contest. I think what you do is you don't main event it, and you let professional dunkers do it. That's what you do. Because these Obi Toppins, these dunk contest people. Who was a guy from Golden State that bloody entered it? He's got hops, but it's just
Scano?
Yeah, I think that's him. Yep. They're not professional dunkers. Dunking is a product of what they do every day, but it's playing basketball. They're not professional dunkers. And us at home, we see that guy with the blue hair doing all that dunks and stuff on TikTok and going. So that's what we're used to.
Wild.
We're now our baseline. What a cool dunk is crazy. Behind the back, under the leg, through the nose kind of dunks. We're seeing these Obi topping off the backboard that we saw the last 20 years. It's like, come on.
Which is half the problem with the dunk contest. It's because the bar has been set so high.
So
the other thing you kind of had alluded to, but I'll just carry on that point, or talk on that point, was having guys who have something to prove. Because these guys that, like, they'll get a following on social, don't get me wrong, but having them in a big event like this would give them a completely different avenue of public profile.
100%.
What did the NBA players have to prove? Nothing. And they've got the potential risk of injury or embarrassment.
Exactly.
You put pro dunkers in there and you give them that spotlight, they're going to go out and kill it.
And they can make a career out of winning it. So you're going to have people who are investing, and you're going to see dunks that are going to blow your mind year on year on year, 100%. So those are probably my 2 main suggestions. I think the 3-point competition, I think the only thing they need to do is... like they do in WWE, they need to create some sort of story or narrative. It's this player versus that player, East versus West. There needs to be some sort of thing you attach to, because at the 3-point moment, you just kind of find the player that you like and you want that person to win, and it's kind of
not gonna lie.
Whatever.
If you did matchups, you can tell a lot more stories with it, and that
100%.
comes down to.
Can you imagine a finals matchup between Ray Allen and let's say Tony Parker or something? You know, just like that, reliving that would be so amazing, because you're either a Heat fan or you're a Spurs fan, and I'd buy into that hype so much, because I'd really want Ray Allen to lose that, despite the fact I love him because he's Celtic. He was a Celtic.
There's 2 problems to this, and so this is what UFC has, for example. You market a guy, you put storyline behind it, but obviously if you can't control the narrative, you could build up all this hype and it could not deliver, because you don't necessarily get the result you think you're going to get. But yeah, in terms of booking certain players together, like if you've got 2 players who genuinely don't like each other, that plays out quite nicely. If they've had a bit of back and forth and you put them together.
Exactly. The
one thing I want to go back to, so with regard to the All-Star game in general, the thing you have to, and it doesn't get encountered enough, the hardcores are going to watch League Pass, they're going to watch all the playoff games, even if it's not necessarily their guys.
Yep.
The All-Star game, it's sad to admit, and this is like WrestleMania, and again going to wrestling or other sports, like the most popular events in most sports are like the Monaco Grand Prix and Formula 1, for example. It's a terrible race to watch because there's not a lot of overtaking because it's a narrow track, but casual people watch it. The All-Star game isn't necessarily for the hardcore NBA fan. It's a celebration of the NBA, and it's to get casual, like it's event watching. So people who don't normally watch basketball watch it. So that's the perspective on it. It's about trying to make it a spectacle, which is why they go for the insane.
Yeah, but you're giving them such a skewed view of what the NBA is, and you're giving, like, you know, it's like, yeah, okay, we're doing this for the casual viewer, but from a business perspective, you want your casual viewers to turn into customers. You want your casual viewers to be the people that buy the League Pass. If you watch that All-Star Weekend, you're not getting the same thing. You'd feel ripped off. So that's why I think it's a terrible idea.
It depends on how intently they're watching the game, because if you're watching it kind of casually and you see the big ooh-ah moments to get the replays and the highlights, you're still going to get their satisfaction. Now, as a basketball fan, especially before the recent, I don't know, they're going to call it the Kobe quarter. Like, I forget the official title, but until the changes to the targeted scoring system, the Elam ending, I believe, was the original title for it. It wasn't great because you could end up with blowouts, and then ultimately it's just playing out time.
Exactly.
The game will be kind of whatever until like the last, say, 4 minutes if it's close, and then we'll tighten up. With the targeted score, it does make it a lot better because, again, you saw that in the first year. Like that fourth was absolutely epic.
Yeah, and that's why I didn't rip too much on the All-Star game itself, because they have done it. You know what I actually really loved was how they did the rookies and sophomores this year. That was epic. How they had, what's it, 6 or 4 teams. They all played for a spot. Then the final played. I love that. That was cool. They need to keep adding to that like that. But more to your point around, they're doing it for the casual viewer. It's so much more expensive as a business owner or business to get new customers to spend money. You want your existing customers to spend more. So if you can make the All-Star game a little bit more exciting and figure out a way to monetize that for your current viewers, you'll get more money. That's in my opinion.
That's always the perspective of people in the entertainment business. So you can have that perspective, but again, going to other references. So like sometimes the attitude to companies is that they will, to a degree, take that viewer for granted, for lack of a better way of putting it. And so, we know we're going to get these people turning up to the All-Star games, turning up to this, turning up to that. So we need to target these other people and get them in.
Yeah, a lot of businesses don't look at their current, and I'm not saying that the NBA doesn't know what they're doing. I'm just saying it just seems like they're not trying to get more money out of their current audience. They're trying to get new money from new customers. But is the All-Star Weekend really the place to do that? I don't know. Moving on, Ben Simmons. Benny Boy Simmons.
What a turnaround.
I mean, my whole opinion on this has changed so much since the start right to the finish.
Keeping up with the narrative is a headache in of itself. But
to be honest, right in the start, when Ben first got slandered against Atlanta, because realistically, Ben was a hero right up till that Atlanta series. He had just averaged a triple-double in the series before Atlanta against Washington. Before that, he had shown signs of a better Magic Johnson, at least defensively. Not so much passing and scoring, but defensively. And
can you say Magic if you're not talking about passing and scoring?
Well, he's a big guard who could handle the ball and pass the ball and score at will. Except Magic's probably. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make was he was a hero. He had one, I'm not going to say bad season because it wasn't horrible. It wasn't great, but against that Atlanta team, what did he do? He did 9, 6, and 9. So that's still not terrible.
That's not terrible, but it's not what you expect from.
That's not what he did.
It's
not what he did the series before. I get that, right? But what is crazy to me is just how that narrative changed so much. And I think it was only a stretch of 2 games. I think it was only really the elimination game and maybe one other where the perception of him really went downhill. There was that game where he passed up that shot under the basket, and after that game, the fans went at him, and then when they finally lost that series. But it's crazy to think how you can turn from a hero to a place to a villain, and that was in the span of 2 games. And that's kind of where my problem lay with all the Philly fans who ripped him, because I'm like, this guy was your trusted process guy with Embiid. You two are going to rock this. And he has 2 bad games, and you guys absolutely slander him. So I was very, very pro Ben Simmons when all the stuff went down and he requested a trade and Doc came out and said that stuff. I was very pro Ben Simmons because I'm like, nah, man, like that's not how a loyal fan base should respond. And your coach of all people shouldn't come out and say, I don't know if you're going to be, if you are the point guard for it. That's just, I love Doc, but come on, you cannot say that, man. I get he was frustrated, but you just cannot say that. So I was pro Simmons. Then it kind of dragged on, and then it dragged on, and then he wasn't answering phone calls, he wasn't turning up, and then at some point I just said, look, somewhere along the line you signed a contract. Somewhere along the line you've got a moral and you've got an obligation.
You've got a contractual obligation.
Yeah, you've got to turn up to work. You just have to.
Or you pay the penalty.
Exactly.
Not turning up to work.
And then obviously this is when the city of Philly really got into the guy.
Got into being the city of Philly.
And it turned a bit ugly. And then that's about the time that I said, oh, come on, Ben, like I don't agree with you anymore. Like this, you signed a contract, you get there. And then the whole mental health stuff come out, and then I turned again and said, oh, well, you know what? I can understand that. The dude's losing millions of dollars. He's got an entire city. And I saw a lot of the TikToks, man. It wasn't just a sports fan. There were like gangbangers out there, like threatening, if you come through the city, we're going to, there was some crazy videos put out there. And I get it, right? It's the internet. People are stupid. But then I flipped back and I was like, this probably isn't like, this is a terrible way to go about it. Everything's been watched by the media, blah, 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 blah. And then this whole trade stuff come out about him going to Brooklyn. And that's when I thought, okay, we've finally got some momentum. And boom, we have it. But at the same time, James Harden starts acting up and down in Brooklyn, and he starts saying all kinds of weird stuff. So now I'm turning on Harden because I'm like, this dude can't get along with any team. He can't have success anywhere. So this whole Ben Simmons narrative was up and down, up and down. Anyway, we now have Ben Simmons on Brooklyn, and we've got James Harden in Philly. Who won the trade, Tim?
I mean, I'm not going to say this is a win-loss trade like, say, Brooklyn-Boston a few years ago.
But, one of the worst trades of all time, yes.
Or like Westbrook coming to the Lakers this year even.
Second worst trade of all time, probably. Well, that wasn't a trade.
But I think you have to say Philly.
Philly won?
I think because they got their guy. And it's not to say Simmons wasn't a good player, but that clearly that had come to its end. And it didn't fit. And I think to go back to your point about that turnaround against Simmons, it's something that's been bubbling for a while because of the perception of like him being like a really good player, don't get me wrong, but there's certain parts of his game that needed attention and they wanted, like, it's been something, him putting videos out there, for example, of him taking more shots, taking perimeter shots, practicing on that, but them not seeing that come to fruit, and that happening over the long period of years. I think by Philly standards, the fans had kind of supported him and not really had a negative feedback against it, and that was just a bubbling of that emotion coming to the surface. I think Ben has the potential to be really good in Brooklyn because they need a guy like him.
Oh, heck yeah.
He's a much better fit there, obviously. How Brooklyn, again, Brooklyn's not going to be as bad as, say, what's going on in Los Angeles at the moment, but the turnaround of expectation versus reality for them as well. Like, when Kyrie and KD first come to Brooklyn, and even once Harden got there, the perception of what their success was going to be versus what their window is now is almost night and day.
Yeah.
And it's not to say they don't have they've still got the ingredients to potentially win a title, but they're only like a couple smidgens above the chances of, oh, well, if LeBron and AD were healthy, they'd win it. Like, you know, like,
I mean,
if things fall perfectly to them, yeah, sure. Like, the year that they've had has been absolutely mixed. And then, again, there's been all this slander at Kyrie. He comes out and drops the game he did the other day, which was absolutely insane. I think with Kyrie, he hasn't had the track record of doing that consistently. I'm sure as a Boston fan, you can attest to that more than me, coming out and saying, having a horrible performance, saying this is never going to happen again, and then laying a bigger egg the next game when the pressure's on. Because it's not that, again, seen the 2016 finals, he knows how to respond to pressure on the court, but does he still have that in him anymore?
So you think... So, sorry, just to recap what you just said. So you think Philly's a better team than Brooklyn now because of the trade?
If I had to bet on a team to win this year, Milwaukee has to be in the conversation in the East, obviously. Yep. I think arguably the most in the conversation just because they're consistent, they're steady. Philly, if it plays out perfectly, I feel like they have
I think
ceiling.
Philly have a bloody good chance.
They have a bigger ceiling, and I think I would definitely take them over Brooklyn, personally.
Wow, interesting. See, I think... Personally, Brooklyn got better. And I think that because Harden wasn't Harden in Brooklyn. Okay? He in his first 5 games with Philly, he's shooting better. His true shooting's better, his assist rate's better, and he's shooting and he's scoring more at the rim. In the first 5 games in Philly, reminds me a little bit of Blake Griffin from Detroit to Brooklyn, you know, who you know, Blake Griffin come to Brooklyn, he did all right. He did good. James Harden's now going to Philly. He's doing good again. So part of me thinks, okay, Brooklyn lost an elite scorer. They did, but they got an elite defender. They've got 2 elite scorers already, but they got an elite defender and elite playmaker. Harden should have been an elite playmaker and should have been an elite scorer in Brooklyn, but he wasn't. So on paper, sure, Harden, KD, Kyrie is pretty unbeatable as a team. But what they actually got were was different to what they look like on paper.
Well,
so what I'm suggesting is that Brooklyn are now better because they have a
better fit.
Literally defensive player of the year. Like Ben Simmons should have been Depoy. Should have been, in my opinion. So they got a defensive player of the year candidate, someone who can pass the ball. They got a big body and someone who can play all 5 positions. That's what they need. KD has proven that he can get a team offensively at least to the finals. If it wasn't for his big toe, he probably would have won a ring without those elite scorers, with Harden's hamstring. So I don't think Brooklyn needed more offense, and I actually think Brooklyn offloading Harden is a better thing, especially for Ben Simmons. If there's one player I would have taken that I could have out of who was left, it would have been Ben Simmons. He's the perfect fit. I think both teams definitely got better. I think Philly are. I'm not even going to call them dark horses to win. I think they got a bloody good shot at winning. They have a great shot. So we'll talk about the playoffs in a minute because we're actually nearly. We've been doing this more than an hour, mate. So we need to tie this up. So okay. So you think Philly got better? I think Brooklyn got better. It'll be interesting to see what plays out. Let's we've got a lot more here to talk about, but we're gonna have to do it another day. So let's talk a little bit about playoff predictions. And who do you see coming out of the East? We'll start with the East. Who do you see coming out of the East?
Well, that's hard. So one thing I want to go back to is Brooklyn getting Seth in the trade is important as well.
That is insane. Sniper. I think he's one of the most efficient shooters, 3-point shooters of all time, if not the.
So it depends on how it plays out in terms of seedings, and there's still a long, 15 games isn't a lot, but it's relatively considering how tight it is between the top 6 teams, basically, in the East.
Heat, Bucks, Sixers, Bulls, Celtics, Cavs, Raps, and Nets is currently standing.
So there's quite a bit of jostling still going on. Depending on what order it plays out in terms of where the seedings are, I would see Milwaukee, obviously. I'd see Philly and the Nets being in the run. Those are the 3 teams I'd say.
I'll just read to you what the potential matchups may be.
Well, let's go as it stands now. So let's try that, for example.
So Heat?
So 1 versus, let's say...
8 will be Nets. Heat versus Nets. Who wins that? Let's just do a quick fire round.
The Heat, I'll put it this way. If the Nets don't get their thing together, then the Heat will beat them.
So give me your prediction. We'll do a quick fire round and I'll do the same. Heat versus Nets.
I would take the Nets in maybe 6.
Bucks, Raptors.
Bucks in 5.
Cavs and
6.
Cavs and 76ers.
Sixers probably in 5.
And Bulls and Celtics. And don't you dare sleep on my Celtics. They have the best defense in the NBA recently.
So assuming everything plays out, guys come back and are healthy.
Yep.
I would say maybe the Bulls in 6 or 7.
Why wasn't I not surprised by that?
No, that's honestly not a knock against Boston. I've partly followed their progress, obviously, with Alex being there and being a big fan of his. Defensively, early in the season, especially when they had all their horses, they were a very solid team. And the way DeRozan's playing this year, I
agree. You can't overlook the Bulls. The Bulls, the Grizzlies, the Wolves, and the Hornets are probably the most exciting teams to watch in the NBA at the moment. They're just amazing. How they play is so electrifying. So, okay. All right, so we move to the second round. You chose Nets over the Heat, or?
Yeah, Nets.
Okay, so we would go Nets versus the Bucks. Both teams fully healthy.
That's hard. You have to play the practicality out, even health being part of it, Kyrie's vaccination status for one, and also just Kyrie being Kyrie this year.
Give me an answer.
I'm going to take the meme, Bucks and 6.
Okay, Celtics, Bulls, 76ers.
Sixers and 6.
Okay, so did you say you took the Bucks?
Yeah, I did.
So let's say Eastern Conference Finals between the Bucks,
Sixers.
Who would you take?
Oof, that would be a hell of a series.
That is a heck of a series. I'm hoping it can. Oh no, I want Nets to get up, but Bucks 76ers. Who are you taking?
I think it would be interesting finally seeing Harden and Giannis have a chance to be on opposite ends in a playoff series. I'll say that for one. Last year excluded, but again, let's not go into the Nets last year. I would, as it stands now, I'd probably lean slightly towards the Bucks in 7 maybe, but I also think this could be
Bucks
Harden.
and 7s. No, we'll take that. Okay, so Bucks. Let's talk about the West. And the West is going to be a little bit tricky because we're still a bit early, so some teams might sneak up. But let's just take it as I've got it here. Phoenix and the Clippers. So under how I've currently got it, Lakers aren't in. So Phoenix, Clippers.
Phoenix. 5, maybe 6.
Grizzlies, Timberwolves.
Grizzlies.
Golden State, Denver. That's a good series.
That's a hell of a
good. And when we're assuming Draymond, Iggy, they're all back. No Wiseman though. Let's just say no Wiseman.
Okay.
Draymond,
So
Iggy
how is Denver looking in terms of health?
Yep, pretty healthy. They got their pieces. That is the series.
Every instinct is telling me every natural instinct is telling me to pick the Warriors because that just seems like the obvious pick. But what Denver's done in general when they've been healthy has obviously been astounding, and
Who you taking?
can't discount the scholar. I'll take the Warriors.
Okay.
6 or 7.
Jazz, Mavericks.
I'll take the Mavericks because the Jazz have a history of disappointing.
Okay, that leaves us with Phoenix and Dallas.
Ooh. This actually plays nicely into Phoenix's hand, which isn't the first time. I would take the Phoenix and the Suns in 6.
And Grizzlies, Golden State.
I feel like I have to take the Warriors.
Okay.
In that case.
In which case, Phoenix versus the Warriors
Yes,
in the
Warriors.
Western Conference Finals.
The Warriors have a proven track record. Now, the team's not necessarily the same now, assuming Clay kind of gets into the run of things, and I still think it'll take him a while to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Also seeing how it plays out with Draymond. But
Who you taking?
I feel like I'm going to go against my own logic here and take Phoenix because I feel like they will be a deeper
you are
team.
predicting a Phoenix Bucks finals.
again.
Okay.
Because if there's anything I learned from last year's playoffs, you have to account for practicality. Like, it can't be always the best case scenario of a team because
People put way too much stock into the Bucks winning last year. Way too much. They won. Thanks to a freaking toenail, dude. They won thanks to a toenail.
It's controversial because of how that series
There's no
out,
way they're going back
but
to
also
back.
other teams not being fully committed, like the Lakers and the Clippers, for example.
There's
not
no way
having
they
a
go
full
back to
complement.
back, Tim. All right, I'm going to tell you mine. I'll start with the East. I think who comes out of the East?
So you play the same orders?
Heat, Nets get up. Bucks, Raptors, Bucks get up. 76ers, Cavs, 76ers get up. Bulls, Celtics get up. Then we go Nets, Bucks win that. Oh, no, sorry, Nets win that. 76ers, Celtics. Ooh. Celtics with the best defense. I'm going to go the Celtics beat the 76ers.
Wow.
And that's going to trigger a complete blowing up of the 76ers you watch. And then we are going to go Nets, Celtics. Nets beat the Celtics to make the finals. Moving on to the West.
Sorry, can we just go back to this point again? You don't see any drama at all happening with arguably, outside of LA, the most dramatic team in the NBA, in the Nets.
No.
Don't see any drama playing them in the playoffs.
No, I don't. I see KD putting up 35. I see Kyrie being okay to play, and I see Ben Simmons being a lockdown defender.
He will be playing potentially half.
Potentially, or they just pay the home fine, right? $5,000, I'd do it. Anyway, Phoenix, Clippers, Grizzlies, Wolves, Grizzlies, Golden State, Denver, Golden State, Dallas and Utah, Dallas. I think I pick exactly the same as you that round.
Yeah.
Now it gets interesting. I think Dallas upset the Suns.
Really?
Yep. I think Dallas. I think Dallas get the Suns.
I think I saw something about they were like, I'm gonna say 23-3 since Christmas Day the other day.
Yeah. I think they get them, bro. I really do. I think Golden State beat the Grizzlies.
You think Jason Kidd gets it that much with the Mavs?
Yep. I think Golden State beats Grizzlies. Yep. And then it comes GSW Mavericks semi. I think Golden State win that. I think it's a Golden State Nets final, and I think the Nets win.
I think if things play out perfectly for Brooklyn, then yeah, absolutely. Because we know what their ceiling is.
What I will say is, I am happy for any team other than the Lakers to win this year. Any team. So
I mean, it's an
makes me
outside shot.
very
it's
happy.
An absolute outside shot at best. I mean, let's play out that scenario using that logic, right? So in this case, the Lakers beat whoever they face in the first playing game. They beat the Clippers, undoing the 4 losses they've had this year. They then face Phoenix in the first round. The only scenario I see them beating Phoenix, because again, the
healthy AD. You need a healthy AD.
Our team being healthy and either CP or Book going down. And then,
hang on. Are you counting on Book going down?
No. So I'm saying, like, realistically, it would be a reverse of fate of last year. Like, we get through despite arguably not being the better team because one of the key players is gone.
I see.
So at that point, that ends up, so the Lakers face, in that scenario, Dallas, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So the Lakers, I think, would be capable of beating Dallas because it's LeBron and he'll find a way to do it.
Did you see last time Lakers played Dallas?
I have.
Did you watch? What I was surprising to me was the last quarter when LeBron insisted on picking up Luka, and Luka cooked him every possession. Luka either assisted or scored on every possession in the last few minutes of that game, and LeBron picked him up, and he cooked LeBron every which way to Sunday, buddy, and I loved it.
Okay. I think the absolute ceiling of this team, even things going as best as they can, is the Western Conference Finals, because I think despite LeBron traditionally matching up well against Golden State, I don't think they beat the Warriors firing on all cylinders, like as we're constructed at the moment.
Timmy, that's us for today, my friend. Thank you for joining me. See you next time. Thanks for joining us.